Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our DeSales Scholars Series. I'm Brother Dan Wisniewski. I serve the university as its provost. And I'm so excited to see so many people here on campus, especially our students, to engage in this event and to learn and have some lunch. So I'm excited to see you here. I'm also excited that we have so many people joining us on Zoom as well. I'm also reminded to ask you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation today. But I'm very excited to welcome back to campus Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Patrick McDonnell. I want to tell you a little bit about him, and then I also want to share a little bit about how I know him. Patrick McDonnell has served as the Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection since being nominated by Governor Tom Wolf in 2016. His career with DEP spans several decades, beginning in 1998. Prior to becoming Secretary, Pat served as the department's Director of Policy. He also ran the State Energy Office, coordinating renewable energy and energy efficiency issues. Patrick previously served as DEP's Deputy Secretary for Administration, overseeing the agency's budget, human resource, and information technology programs. In addition, he spent over 3 years as Executive Policy Manager for former Public Utility Commissioner Pamela A. Whitmer, focusing on electric, natural gas, and water issues. McDonnell has served several roles with the Environmental Council of the states, including Treasurer, Vice President, Vice Chair of the Innovation and Productivity Committee, and is currently serving as President. As I mentioned, Patrick McDonnell graduated from here with a bachelor's degree in 1995. He also received a master's degree in political science from Lehigh University. He lives in Harrisburg with his wife Colleen and their 4 children. He's a native of Philadelphia. Patrick and I went to Father Judge High School together. Back then I knew him as Ace. It's very hard to call you Patrick or Mr. McDonnell. So it's good to have you back on campus. We also spent 1 year here at then Allentown College of St. Francis DeSales. But I'm very excited to welcome back my former classmate, Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and one of our own DeSales alums, Patrick McDonnell.
Hello, everyone. Great to be with you here. As I said, I'm Pat McDonnell. I'm a Secretary of DEP and alum here. Dan and I got to know each other very well. The piece he left out is every morning we would be at Father Judge High School sitting at a cafeteria table for breakfast before class started, where I got to know all about Cyndi Lauper and Madonna. So for those of you who know Dan, you know he still is a devotee of Cyndi Lauper in particular. Want to just say, I mean, this is like in particular a very special event for me. As I said, I graduated from here. I got to spend 3 years in Tassacall, spent a year up at the Heights, did work study in the basement of Dueling. Most importantly, met my now wife in the cafeteria, proposed to my wife outside of Conmy Hall, and we got married up at what we called Brisson Chapel, but now is Conley Chapel. So very, very, very deep ties to the university here, and very appreciative of everything it has given me. In terms of my current work in the Department of Environmental Protection, I think it's always useful to let people know what we do at the department, because there's some things we do that are probably fairly obvious in the name, and some other things that we do that are not. We are the environmental regulatory agency for the state. So we do clean air permitting and enforcement, clean water permitting and enforcement. Anytime you disturb an acre or more of land in the state, one of our permits is involved. We oversee waste management within the state. Again, that's some of the obvious things, but beyond that, we also have the radiation program for the state, and that's everything from nuclear power plants down to the x-ray machine in your dental office. We have some oversight for that. We have oversight over our brownfields and hazardous sites cleanup program, so we oversee all of that work. We, as was said, I had a job previously doing renewable energy efficiency policy work for the state. We oversee the mining programs for the state, coal mining and quarries, both coal and non-coal. We oversee the oil and gas program and all of the drilling that occurs in the northern tier and in the southwestern part of the state. And then, we also do things like black fly spraying, gnats. So we get a lot of, that tends to be something we get a lot of inquiries about. We do mosquito spraying, we do tick surveillance. A lot of good partnerships with other agencies in terms of the work that we do. But today, really, what I wanted to address with you all is where we are and some of the work going on around climate. Our agency, by law, under the Pennsylvania Climate Act, has primary responsibility for a number of things with climate. We produce the climate action plan every 3 years for the state. We produce a climate assessment every 3 years for the state. And I think in particular, it is important for our future leaders, and we have a lot of future leaders in the room here today and watching online, to be engaged and ready for the work that is happening. So climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. That's a quote from the most recent IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, from the beginning of August. That report indicates our climate is warming faster than predicted, that our climate is changing dramatically, and that the role of humans in that is, quote, undisputed. And that is something new within the context of that report and the thousands of scientists who contribute to it. Of the greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change, the IPCC states that carbon dioxide is the main driver of climate change. And since 1900, our world has warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that warming experience will continue to accelerate because once those greenhouse gases are in the air, they stay there for decades. So we're going to continue to see acceleration of these trends. It's crucial that we, as a state, play a role in addressing climate change. We are the 5th largest emitter in the nation of greenhouse gases. We emit more than some countries like Greece and Portugal. From our state, we have more emissions. It's true we cannot, as a state, fix climate change by ourselves, but certainly the world can't fix it without us. We have to play a part in dealing with this. The greatest hazard we see in the state right now is flooding and excess precipitation. There's an interesting dynamic going on there where we're going to both see less rain events, but more water. So if you've been around as long as I have, you used to watch storms and they would kind of sweep across the country. You'd see them in Ohio, you'd get the rain in your area, and then it would move on. Now we get these microburst storms where you can be in one area getting 5-6 inches of rain in a couple of hours and go a half-mile away, and maybe it's drizzling, maybe there's nothing. So we're seeing increased flood events, we're seeing increased precipitation, and we're expecting the number of days to continue to increase, the number of days with excess precipitation to increase by 8%. We're projected to experience 24% more days with very heavy precipitation and 42% more with extremely heavy precipitation by 2050. It's difficult to quantify the number of additional flood events because, as I said, these will be very localized. I'll point out there's an economic cost to this right now, where when we have some of these events, there's federal guidelines that say you need to exceed a certain amount of damage monetarily before you qualify for federal dollars. With these microburst events, we're seeing a number of events where it's costing the state and municipalities millions of dollars that we don't have access to those emergency funds that we would have from larger events. These flood events will have dramatic impacts on the Commonwealth. Some of it being health related, respiratory issues from indoor air quality where you have mold and other things that are starting to build up. Mental health impacts from people dealing with the loss of their homes, the impacts to their families. Certain populations we know will be disproportionately impacted by this, in particular within our environmental justice areas. Places that are disproportionately poor or minority tend to feel the worst impacts of this. Threatens supply chains, and again, that's something that we certainly saw the impact of COVID on our supply chains here over the last year. Crop and livestock are at risk from flooding, and those damages that may occur also have water quality impacts. So as you see additional flooding, you see additional runoff, you see additional nutrients and other things in the streams that have an impact. And then again, probably the most visible to the average person is our infrastructure, in particular roadways. In 1 year, the Department of Transportation spent over $120 million dealing with flood impacts to their infrastructure. That was unplanned, money that isn't going to the safety of existing roadways, the safety of the existing bridge system, but are dealing with acute impacts to the infrastructure from flooding. It's not just rainfall, though. When we think about climate change, a lot of times you go to temperature. We're going to see dramatic increases in temperature, and we've already seen some of that. Our average daily temperatures are projected to rise 4 to 8 degrees by mid-century here. And again, to put that in some context, you go from at the end of the last century, about 5 days on average each year where the temperatures would be above 90 degrees. Now we're looking at more like the order of 2 months where we might be experiencing those kinds of temperatures. That again has health impacts, has dramatic impacts on certain populations above others. Again, poor minority areas tend to have greater impacts from this, can not afford to cool their homes as much. There's areas in Philadelphia where the temperature is 20 degrees hotter than in another area, simply because there's no tree cover. You're dealing with a lot of asphalt, black roofs as opposed to cooler roofs. And that in particular, in addition to that population, we're looking at impacts on the elderly, people who suffer from asthma, people whose job it is to work outdoors. It's going to impact, again, our farm industry, which is the biggest industry that we have in the state. Dairy cows will need additional cooling. You think about issues like that don't necessarily come front of mind, but that temperature increase will have a dramatic effect on. And if anybody enjoys skiing locally, that's a tourism industry that is significantly in danger. So everybody's cheered up now, right? I know that's all very depressing. The thing I will say is there's a number of things we are doing and can do to address this. As I said, we at the department have primary responsibility for development of the climate action plan, but we aren't the only, this has truly become a total state government effort. I'm co-chair of Governor's Green Government Council with my colleagues at Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Department of General Services. We're working on a number of things collectively as agencies. In addition to that, right now we're doing a lot of work to try to clean up our electric grid. One element of that is looking at entry into Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That is a carbon trading program that Mid-Atlantic and Northeastern states currently participate in, have participated in for the last decade. We're looking to enter that. By joining with those other states, it'll help us bring down the costs of dealing with that pollution, because we'll be able to trade allowances across state lines. And again, carbon enters the atmosphere, it stays there, it's not a localized thing. So dealing with it through that market kind of way makes a lot of sense. We're looking at deployment of a number of technologies, and I'll get into some more detail, but electric vehicles, solar, wind energy, energy storage, all of these things are critically important. When we think about climate change, there's 3 areas we focus on: electric, industrial, that's cement, things like that, produce a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're some of the hardest things to get at, and our transportation infrastructure. Electric vehicles, we all see the news that they are really coming along. We have tens of thousands right now in our state out of millions of vehicles on the road. But we also see that the manufacturers and the dealerships are offering more and more models. Many of them have decided they're going to phase it out. The importance of that is, if you buy a traditional gas engine today, that will be giving the same emissions for the lifetime of that vehicle. If you get an electric vehicle, as a starting point today, that's 2/3 the emissions. And that just gets better as we, I'm sorry, can I get a water? I'm like feeling. Thank you very much. Throat is dry. Those electric vehicles will reduce, by 2/3 the amount of emissions that a traditional vehicle puts out. That will further reduce as we clean up the grid. So because you're plugging into the grid, as the grid gets cleaner, the vehicles get cleaner, and we continue to drive down those emissions. That transportation is particularly important in, again, some of our urban areas and other places, because it is, you're getting acute emissions, again, within minority areas, environmental justice areas, urban areas. They're breathing in those tailpipe emissions. So the more we can do to clean that up, the better the environmental and health outcomes that we can see. We're wanting to make sure that as we roll out electric vehicle programs, that everybody benefits from that, that we're not leaving those communities behind. So we've had a real emphasis on trying to get electric vehicle infrastructure into some of these communities. A real focus on heavier duty kind of trucks and vans that might travel in some of those areas, trying to, again, bring down the amount of localized emissions at the same time we're addressing climate. And it's again, particularly important in areas where parking and things like that can be a challenge, right? Getting them access to electric vehicles is critical. There's a consumer rebate program we offer. So if you're in the market, go to our website and check that out. There's electric vehicle rebates available. And we're seeing the cost of all of this come down, dramatically over time. So, electric vehicles have a higher upfront cost, but no oil changes, no gasoline. Those kind of regular costs go away. Solar energy, in 2018, we released a report called Finding Pennsylvania's Solar Future that was working to figure out what policy levers we need to pull to get to 10% solar in the state by 2030. To put that in some perspective, back in the mid-2000s, there was an act that was very forward-looking at the time that set a goal of 0.5% from solar by 2020. We've achieved that, but the technology, the costs, all of that have come a very, very long way in the interim. And we are seeing a lot of solar capacity starting to be installed across the state, grid scale solar as well as rooftop solar. To get to 10%, we would need 11 gigawatts. That's 11,000 megawatt, 11,000 megawatts of solar. Right now, we're at around a gig in the planning stages in the state, or that's been approved at PJM. There's actually and PJM is the grid operator, but in the queue at PJM is about 13 gigawatts. So we're already well on the way to achieving that 10% just based on current economics of solar panels. Solar panels are outcompeting other forms of electricity across the state. And that is a sea change from when I started. I can remember when I started, it was a big deal if you could get a 1 or 2 megawatt solar array put someplace 20 years ago. And now we're seeing multiple, hundreds of megawatts being installed in a field. Wind energy, we currently have 1,450 megawatts of wind installed across the state, 25 wind farms. That's enough energy to power about 400,000 homes. Biden administration has announced just this week, in fact, a national offshore wind energy goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030. There's already several of those projects that are in the planning stages. There's a pilot plant that's already built, as well as the Block Island wind farm, 30 megawatts. Long way to go to get to that 30 gigawatts, but if you look at the map of Pennsylvania, we don't exactly have a lot of offshore potential. Lake Erie, maybe. But beyond that, it's going to take manufacturing, infrastructure, those kinds of things. So just the fact that there's a big program to push that is something we want to make sure we're taking advantage of economically, so we can see the environmental benefit of that. Those are the states that are doing that are states that we traditionally exported electricity to. So as everybody, us included, ramps up what their expectations are in terms of a clean energy grid, we need to stay at some level of parity there, or we're going to lose out. We're going to start seeing those other states take some of that energy that we currently produce. We need to do clean power, or they're going to find their own. Energy storage. This is like one of my favorite topics in the world. I could really geek out about the way the markets work around this stuff. The reality right now is if there is a solar project being designed, it has batteries attached to it in our state. Energy storage has come an incredibly long way in terms of the cost. As the battery prices have dropped down, as people have seen where the markets are going, developers are just including storage as part of their design. Storage is important because with solar and wind, it's not always sunny and it's not always windy. So you need something to level that out. There's a lot of really innovative things going on. One of the things, going back to the electric vehicles, for example, Ford announced the Lightning, which is their pickup truck. One of the components of that is the ability to plug it into your house and operate it. And when you start thinking about everybody having a pretty decent sized battery in their garage, just sitting there on four wheels, there's a lot of potential for us to start aggregating some of that and working it out. So as we look at energy storage, we've put together an energy storage assessment. We released that last year, and again, policy levers and things that we need to put together. We've assembled an energy storage consortium that is currently working with us on how we improve manufacturing, how we improve deployment of storage technologies. And that's agnostic to what the technology ultimately is. There are technologies like batteries that you hear about. There's also pumped hydro, pumped storage, where when you have the solar, you use it to operate a pump, pump the water uphill and release the water downhill to produce energy when you need it. We're looking to pair storage wherever we can with our renewable energy, and that is a continued focus of the agency. So a few things, and then I'll leave you with a personal anecdote. One, things you can do, and honestly, I'll just say, there's a lot we can do in our individual homes and in our lives. I came here in a Chevy Volt, have solar panels on my house, all of that kind of stuff. But the important thing is making sure we have more and more options around this. So if you have feelings about this, whatever they are, make sure you're engaging with your public officials on it. Make sure you're letting them know what it is you want. Make sure you're educating yourself. Make sure you understand what the potentials are here. I gave some overview. As I said, we have a climate action plan. We have a climate assessment that can give you a lot of really good information about what this all looks like going forward. Make sure you're taking those individual actions, and that can be within your dorms, within your homes, within your cars, within your campus, within your state, within your county, within your municipality. Make sure you're engaging at all these levels. I always say it's not one thing or two things that's going to solve this. It's 100 things, 1,000 things, 1,000,000 things that are going to solve this. It's a series of individual and collective decisions that are ultimately going to get us there. And one of the things we've done as a state is set a goal. So the goal for us, I mentioned the Green Gov Council, is by 2025 a 26% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and by 2050 an 80% reduction. To be frank, a number of states have already announced more ambitious goals, so that's something we continue to talk about and look at. But we need to, as a state, do our part. We need, as individuals, as residents, as communities, to do our part in dealing with the climate crisis. The last thing I'll mention is to take a complete left turn. One of the things I do for fun is improv comedy. Raise your hand if you're expecting those to be the words that came out of my mouth. And I always say it's like super helpful in the work that we do, and I will tell you why, because it's something I want to make sure you all take on and think about in your life. When I say I do improv, people say I could never do that, and it's because they think I get up on a stage and just make stuff up. Sort of, but not really. What you're doing in actuality is you're up on a stage with your team. You're up on a stage with other people, and you get a word from the audience, and one of you is inspired by that word to say something. And if somebody else on my team does that, my only job in that moment becomes to listen and respond honestly to what that person is giving me, to have their back and make sure I'm participating and adding to the conversation. I add to the conversation, their job, listen, respond honestly. I like to say that is my job. My job is listen and respond honestly. I bring experience, I bring perspective, I bring opinion to every interaction I have, as do you all. But being open to all of those other perspectives, opinions, education, experience that people have is critically important. I always say, my dream is always, when I get to leave a meeting, having come up with some solution to a problem that wasn't necessarily the solution anybody walked into that room with. But just through being open in the interaction, we were able to see what the real root of a problem was and get at it. So I encourage you all, as whether in your studies or your future work, to really, really take that on. Make sure you are listening, responding honestly to the individuals you interact with, and I guarantee you will come up with solutions to things that you didn't imagine what was the solution when you walked into the room. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you all very much. Really, really love being back on campus, and we'll open it up for questions. Got one right here.
How you doing, Mr. McConnell? I'm Jim Olchaney. I'm the Director of Facility Services here at DeSales University.
Excellent.
But I have a personal question about solar power or anything going energy green. Do you see with two new bills coming through Congress, the infrastructure bill and the other bill, that there is going to be more incentive coming out from our state to do more solar?
Sure. And not sure if, I want to make sure everybody heard, it was about federal incentives and the bills that are potentially moving through Congress. That is definitely one of the focuses, and there's a couple of elements that have been floated around. Some of it is a clean energy standard. So energy sold into the grid would have to meet certain standards, and then some other is incentive. Some of that will depend on how it's finalized. Back when they did the coming out of the recession, they developed some programs that gave us money, and we turned some of that into what we called Pennsylvania Sunshine Program, and that was a rebate program for solar. Potential for something like that, depending on how the money comes to the state, but that'll be a budgetary, legislative, governor conversation for sure. But yeah, it's exciting possibility.
The reason why I ask is I'm currently looking into putting solar on my house, and I see the tax incentives that are there, the tax credit and everything else, and I'm just wondering if I should wait or should I just go for it.
So the two things, right? One, as I said, I have solar on my house, and I'll just say, like right now, this gets slightly technical, but only slightly. There's net metering rules in the state, which means you get money, you get paid at the rate you would have paid for the electricity. In PPL and PICO right now, in particular, solar is a better deal than your traditional electric bill. It's economic, which is why I got it. So it's economic right now. I don't know what the chances, possibility are of anything else. I always, I have 4 kids, as was said, and when one of them buys something and then it goes on sale the next week and they're upset about it, I'm like, was it worth it when you bought it? So I think a lot of the importance here is, making sure if it's worth the value that you're paying for it out of. There'll always potentially be a better deal tomorrow. I think it's important to just be moving forward on this stuff. Yep.
We have a question online
Okay.
from Paige. Particularly in our area, we've been seeing an increase in manufacturers, warehouses, and trucking. How might this trend impact our state's environmental and health outcomes? Is anything being done to mitigate any potential problems?
Sure. So that in particular, there's a few different vectors that hits, right? One is land use. So some of what we're seeing is, I again talked about flooding. When you're increasing the amount of impervious surface, assuming these are being built on greenfield sites, you're creating additional flooding risk potentially, depending on where and how you're doing that. In our state, we require offsets for wetlands. You have to either avoid a wetland impact as step one, or mitigate it if it's completely unavoidable. So there's a water impact, and that's something that we manage through the existing regs. The other piece, and this is where we're kind of right in the middle of potential, I'll say, and that is the air emission side from the vehicles. We're seeing prototype heavy-duty trucks, electric trucks, but it's not something that you're seeing run down the roadway right now. You have things like Amazon buying vans, big order of electric vans, and those we should be seeing within the next couple of years here. So the air emissions piece, and should clarify, under Clean Air Act, we don't get to regulate vehicles. We have in our state adopted California standards, which are slightly better than federal standards for certain vehicle classes, but the reality is we're going to see those air impacts until we electrify our fleets. The other piece is, of course, gets more into Department of Transportation and others, where it's just number of trucks on the road, where those are located, and even some local community decision making about where they want to see that traffic and how they manage that through local zoning. So it's a good question, though.
My name is Aileen. I'm a law and society major, and I'm a senior. So it's kind of like a two-part question that I had. I know you mentioned earlier that places like Philadelphia, which are cities, they tend to have like hotter temperatures and things of such, and they also tend to be minority communities and lower income communities. I currently live in Allentown, which is like, more a minority community as well as low income. So the first part of my question would be, what can we as a community who can't really afford to get like electric cars and like solar panels, what can we do in order to contribute to a greener environment? And also, what would the department do for communities that have lower income in order for us to better the environment as well, since we can't necessarily like afford to do so on our own?
Sure. No, really good question, and honestly, like, thrilled that you raised that, because it's one of our real focuses has been environmental justice in the agency, and I'll just give what the history has been. We established, and I was around for this, an environmental justice policy back in the early 2000s, that essentially what it would do is just look at permits and just look at some additional public participation and additional outreach that we would do. What we've been trying to do through the EJ office is build that focus into all of our programs. So as a starting point, like grants and those kinds of things, there's now additional points. We've tried to be more active in frankly assisting communities and even filling out those kinds of applications. So if there's a community group or someone that I'll give you my card after this, that you want to put us in touch with, we'll do that. The other, I'd even say, step back kind of thing is one of the most valuable things we've done, my opinion, is go out and do environmental justice listening sessions and then roundtables. Listening sessions, we did 11 of those around the state. And it was good, but it was one-way communication. It was us hearing just from the community. We've been doing some roundtables more recently, frankly interrupted by COVID, although we have done at least one virtually, where you go to the community and have the conversation about what do they need, what can we provide, trying to be a little more circumspect and not try to even have a grant program over here and fit it into what you need, but understand what the need is first, and then see if we have some things we can tailor to that. So, and even just figuring out what is the thing that's important in that community. I've told the story in a couple places where we went to one community and I talked to the regional staff beforehand and was like, what do you think we're going to hear and it was air quality, and it was water quality. We went in the room, composting and lead. That was it. Like, that's what they wanted help with. So, and we continue to engage with them to pull that stuff over a finish line. So it's some of the most detailed work. Like, you have to really get in, and it's not one conversation, it's a lot of conversations, but it's some of the most meaningful work we've done. So I'd love to connect more.
Hey, Pat.
Oh,
Welcome back. Thank you for being here.
of course.
2 questions. One on recharging stations for electric vehicles throughout Pennsylvania and the United States. And the second question is on windmills in regards to, the not in my backyard type of mentality. How do we educate? How do we combat and mature in our level of thinking with climate change?
Sure. So on the first, in terms of EV chargers, we have, as I said, programs to support that. Again, Volkswagen, some of you may be familiar with this, but Volkswagen had installed these cheater devices on their vehicles that operated in one way when they were emission testing, and then turned that off when they were driving. That resulted in a settlement, and we have access to $118 million through that settlement. So we've been using that to do a number of things, taking some of the older diesel buses and trucks off the road and things like that. But a fair bit of it's been going to EV charging infrastructure. We have a level 2 rebate program. That's kind of the simple ones to plug in. And then DC fast chargers, which are the ones that will charge your vehicle in like 20 minutes. And we're getting more and more of that deployed. To be frank, I think we've evolved a little bit on that. Where I think before you'd look at the map and try to figure out where the holes were. And what we've started seeing is it's kind of naturally developing, so where you have vehicles, you have charging stations, where you're charging, it becomes a virtuous cycle. So figuring out how we stay right on kind of the edge of that kind of things, as well as making sure, for example, that you can get on the turnpike and charge your vehicle across the length of the turnpike. Those are the kinds of things we're thinking about there. In terms of wind farms, I think, again, it's one of those where the technology's come a long way. Again, when I first started, you would measure these things in 15, 20 megawatts, and now you're getting up to some of the turbines being gig turbines in the state. The design has improved in terms of bat and bird issues. In terms of the not in my backyard aspect of that, I mean, that's at some level that becomes for each community to decide. We don't have kind of a statewide process for that. One of the things we've seen is different impacts depending on how things are zoned and where things are zoned across the state. But taking that control through codes is important for communities. So.
Hi, my name's Brooke. I'm from Easton. I'm an entrepreneur, and I got to chat with Pat for a few minutes beforehand. I just wanted to share that I think it's really important that we, in the private sector, whether you're a student, business owner, working for a large corporation, that we look, we sort of deconstruct the supply chain, right? One of the students asked about what we can do in our, lesser served or challenged communities economically. And that is to, we have to look at things holistically. So, we have a whole map of the USDA food deserts, right? So generally underserved communities are also USDA food deserts. So what if we begin to look at solutions for making things available in the communities where we live, right? If we live, work, and play and create our life within 10 minutes of walking, especially in an urban area, which is a significant portion of our population across the country, we can begin to be less car dependent. We can use more of our walking power as opposed to getting in a vehicle. If we look at solutions for transportation, we're looking at micromobility for our urban centers. We can look at housing, restoring the housing stock so that everyone has a safe and healthy place to live. Creates a lot of work. Micro enterprises, small businesses, cottage industries, we can restore those kinds of the appreciation for handcrafted things within our own communities, so we're not importing from around the world so much for things. Maybe we think about how we point, click, and buy. Maybe we have to look at ourselves and look, how much consumption of stuff do we really need? That can help reduce the dependency on imports and on interstate trade as well. We want to be good neighbors with all of our community members. Governors from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey are looking at how we work together as a region of the country. So we have to look at all the industries that Patrick mentioned, and as industry leaders, whether it's farming or industry or whatever, transportation, we need to kind of get around the table and start saying, okay, what will we do as the private business community to be responsible to leave a better world for our children and our children's children? And it begins with education. So I think it's really important that our school administrators, our school districts start to really create a curriculum that educates our children about what's actually happening and how do we all as families make a difference on the individual level, and then as we grow, how do we then become engaged in government on a civil level and have real effective conversations around this, starting right here in this room. So I thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And the one thing I'll say, I think one of the things that has been game-changing is more and more companies are now looking at sustainable development goals and things like that, right? So, there's a lot we can do kind of in our own backyards, but the place we all get stuck is when you do need to buy the thing and it's packaged the way it's packaged and, those kinds of things. So now we have companies not only looking at that, but, and again, really interesting stuff. They're looking at like what they call scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 of these development goals. Scope 1 and 2 are the things most directly in their control. That packaging question is a scope 1 kind of thing. The energy they buy might be scope 2. Scope 3 is expectations they're setting on customers and suppliers. So some of these larger corporations are starting to tell their customers and their suppliers that they have certain expectations as to the way they will behave as well. And as you start to see this stuff, spread out, it really, really does start to affect, everything from the environment to the way just capital flows in our economy, right? People are I would say when people are making a big business decision, the thing you have to realize is they're making a 15 or 20-year call in a lot of cases. They're building a facility and planning on it being there and financing it over that time. So if you're looking at everything going on with climate and climate risk as just one example, that leads you to make certain decisions about the kinds of things you will fund on a going forward basis, right? Bets you're willing to make, risk you're willing to take on. So, good stuff. Yeah.
Secretary McDonnell, Douglas Graves at the Bethlehem Press. Right now, in the Lehigh Valley, we have county commissioners trying to balance the idea of solar farms with farmland preservation. And it turns out if you put solar panels on a farm, it's not preserved. So that's kind of a conundrum. Have you addressed that?
So I know Department of Ag is addressing the specifics on the preservation piece. I think one of the things that we've seen just in ag in general, and it's making sure we're balancing a number of things, right? And I won't say there's any straightforward answer. So making sure we're not using solar or frankly a housing development to remove our most productive ag lands. But there are also areas on a farm that are less productive in some cases where solar may be a good opportunity for them to stay in business as a farm and not be forced to sell, right? So it's an issue that definitely been talking with Secretary Russ Redding over at Department of Ag. He and I work together on a lot of land development and water issues. But it's definitely one of the front of mind things as we think about solar is impacts on farms. I will say one of the things we've been looking at and trying to do is getting a little more of this out on brownfields, but those tend to be relatively small for what they're looking for solar development. So we're looking at like old landfills and mine lands as examples. Some of that can be challenging because you need a certain amount of infrastructure there, but we're trying to figure out where are the sweet spots for those things that we might be able to get some solar development. Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yes, I had a question about the solar energy credits, SREC credits.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that in Pennsylvania they're considerably less valuable than in some surrounding states. I think Massachusetts, maybe they're 10 times more valuable in that ballpark. And I just wonder what the dynamics of that was and if that incentive would be increasing in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's we have what's called an alternative energy portfolio standard in the state, and that's where that 0.5% solar requirement comes from. The 0.5% just isn't enough to really drive that price very high. There's a lot more solar available than you necessarily need the credit for. So in for example, New Jersey, where they have a higher portfolio standard and renewable portfolio standard, the prices there tend to be higher. The other thing we see is impact of carbon pricing. So part of that's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in what we're entering. But really a big driver across the country for that is California's pricing, where people will build projects and sell them into the California market because the prices there have been pretty good. But yeah, the specific renewable energy credit for solar within APS is it was very high at the beginning and then came down quite substantially as we saw more and more solar in the market.
Hi, Patrick. Looks like for 2021, carbon emissions are actually on the rise, particularly in the G20, and Paris Accord agreements are not going to be met. I guess the question is, I heard you say we are going to have this 80% goal. How do you suggest that we actually attain these goals when we state them, and what type of enforcement do you think needs to happen that when we make these claims that we also have follow through to make sure that these goals are met?
Sure. So step one and the 26% and the 80% are the Paris goals, and that's what we as a state have committed ourselves to through executive order. Excuse me. So what we're seeing, what we've seen over time and I'll speak in terms of the Commonwealth, is emissions decline in the electric sector in particular. That decline primarily driven by a switch from coal to natural gas. We're down to our last 6 coal plants in the state. What was once about half of the emission, half of the electricity in the state is about 15% today, with another plant having just closed in the last month, and 2 others committed to switching to natural gas. Right. So we're seeing that shift. That's not a shift that can continue forever. There's only the 6 plants left. So we're seeing that decrease, and that's why we need to think more about solar, wind, on the electricity side, and storage, electric vehicles on the transportation side, because a lot of this is, we're relatively unique as a state where in a lot of states there's one thing that is the source of greenhouse gas emissions. In our state, electric, transportation, and industrial are all right around the same, all right around that 30% mark. So we're going to need to focus on it all. Some of that will need federal help with, frankly, because when you're talking about transportation, there's things we can do to incent, but not things we can do to regulate. On the industrial, there needs to be more development of things like renewable natural gas and hydrogen and those kind of technologies, which are coming along but aren't there yet at scale. So electric remains the big opportunity. The good news there is, as I kind of pointed out, the markets are driving a lot of that, where today solar is cost competitive with everything else, as a specific example. So some of it is taking advantage of those market forces, riding it. One of the things I fully acknowledge in all of this is part of the incentive for us needs to be jobs, and the fact that I don't want to just install batteries, I want to build them. I don't want to just install solar panels, I want to build them. Like, we want to make sure we're not losing out to other states, because it's got to get built someplace. And one of my former bosses, Secretary Seif, under the Ridge administration, he used to open every speech by saying, "We're Pennsylvania, we build stuff. That's what we do." We want to continue to build stuff, right? So now we aren't on track as nation for the requirements, but we're also seeing a lot more emphasis on this at the federal level, and I'm hopeful that starts to make sure we're headed in a better direction.
Good afternoon. My name is Victor Ritchie. I just have a few questions, if you wouldn't mind. Outside of the goals set by other entities, the United Nations General Secretary says we only have 11 years to prevent irreversible damage from climate change. Do you believe PA is working towards, do you think we are moving fast enough to meet the 2030 deadline for irreversible damage? Do you think we're doing enough to even get close to that 2030 deadline?
So we are, again, moving toward the 26% and the 80% reduction targets. I think we're on track. I'll say, I've been in front of legislative committees, for example, on regional greenhouse gas initiative, which people are asking why we're moving, so quickly, slow down. And I said, what you describe as too quickly, I describe as urgency. The urgency of the situation at hand. So there's certainly more we need to be doing and thinking about. As I said, transportation being a biggie for not just us, but for the country. Transportation is easily the biggest source across the U.S. It's not necessarily the case in our state. So we are moving as aggressively as we can. Now, there are some things, legislatively that would be helpful, but we're always engaged in that tug of war.
All right, I have a second question.
Sure.
8 states have plastic bag bans on single-use plastic bags. Pennsylvania is not one of them. Do we plan on doing something as simple as banning plastic bags?
Again, that's one of those things that would be legislative, and in fact, in some previous budgets, they've actually included a provision explicitly banning municipalities from banning the plastic bags. I think that's gone away, so there's a couple municipalities, some of the larger municipalities now have that. But again, that would be something that would definitely take a legislative fix in order to do that ban. I know everybody uses, a lot of people are now using the cloth bags and things. I've taken to just putting it all in the grocery cart at the end and walking it out to the car because I can never remember to bring the bag. So I'll leave that as a tip, but it's also one of the big initiatives for the governor here in the last couple of years has been just around litter and trying to reduce the amount of that out there. There's things we can do to go out and clean it up, but if we're not going after the source of this stuff, the source of what is ending up on our roadways, and again, I'll recommend if you haven't seen it, we did a survey of litter on our interstates that came out right before the pandemic, and that has a lot of really good information in there about what we're finding on roadways, the nature of the waste, but also the costs. So our 9 largest municipalities spend about $68 million a year on waste or on litter programs, education, cleanup, etc. So if you're not dealing with it at the grocery store and in the convenience store, you're certainly paying for it in your tax bill.
All right, last question, I swear.
I don't believe you.
The Lehigh Valley is within the top 5 list of growing urban sprawls in Pennsylvania. The sprawl of people is found to destroy natural resources, create more travel by motor vehicles, and increase cost of the transportation and pollution. How does our state government plan on tackling the negative effects, of urban sprawl?
Sure, and it's interesting. It's literally one of my first roles in state government as a management intern. For the first year of my state government, I was with 21st Century Environment Commission. Primary thing they were looking at was land use and urban sprawl, and we're still dealing with a lot of these issues, a quarter century later. The reality is, and it sort of goes to some of the comments on the wind, there's 2 levels, right? One is we are a state that values that municipal control of these things. So engaging with local government on what you want your community to look like, how that should be, what you value is important. At the state level, we're engaged with state planning board and in particular around, one of the real community development issues, which ties back to the discussion earlier, is climate resilience. And the more impervious surface you're putting down, you're creating highways for stormwater to travel. That stormwater ultimately is bringing pollution to streams, but it's also flooding our neighbors. So we've been very focused on building both incentives in, looking at flood protection planning and things like that, which have advantages in terms of that community development. The other thing I'd say is one of the interesting things we've been pushing along these lines is if you look, as you travel and look at a development, you'll often see there's some like big depression in the ground someplace that maybe has a couple cattails growing out of it, and that's how they deal with it, right? We're now working on wetland mitigation banking, doing this stuff at scale. So you're you're protecting and redeveloping an entire watershed, acres of land, not like a quarter acre here and a half acre there. And that really builds in both some pollution reduction benefits, but also some resiliency benefits, where you're giving the water a place to dissipate, you're giving a place for the water to infiltrate, and it's not here and here, and you're hoping that's good enough. The other thing, and it's I promise this is the last thing I'll say about it. one of the things we've been working to do is update just the storm that we plan to. So one of the challenges in all of this is when you're planning toward 100-year and 500-year storms, and you're getting a 100-year storm every 3 years, that leads to some bad planning outcomes as well. So getting our arms around exactly what those kind of planning horizons look like for us in terms of how much water do we need to infiltrate someplace, what do those soils look like, those are all things very much within our bailiwick and our partner's bailiwick. So, yeah.
Okay, I think we have 2 questions left, and then so we'll take the next 2 questions, and then for anyone else that's joining us here in person, there will be time for you to go up and speak with Patrick. But for everyone else at home, then we will be ending. So our last 2 questions.
Hi, I'm Ted Masthay. So when thinking about sort of a broader, sort of either national or international level shift towards clean energy, what role does DEP think that nuclear power plays? Because, right, that's a scalable form of clean energy that exists. And, you hear stories about, I think in Germany, it's like they're decommissioning reactors and basically replacing that with burning fossil fuels, which seems counterproductive. And so what role does nuclear power play in this broader story?
So I think, in terms of the role of nuclear in all of this, I'll deal with the maybe easier part of it first, which is there's been a lot of discussion around new smaller plants and things like that. We haven't really seen any of that come to fruition yet. So the real question becomes around the existing nuclear fleet and how we address that. It's really, really important baseload for us right now from a climate perspective. So in our state, we have 4 plants, 8 units, 2 units at each of those plants left. One of the outcomes actually of entry into RGGI was Beaver Valley, which was one of those nuclear plants that was supposed to shut down, withdrew its announcement that it was shutting down. So we're keeping that important resource online. One of the lessons I learned very early on in my career as we were fighting for 16 megawatt wind farms and things like that was there was a turbine replacement at one of the plants that was like 500 megawatts or something. It was like a ridiculous amount of energy that came out of that. So it's still a really, really important resource. I don't see anything on the immediate horizon in terms of expansion other than maybe additional efficiencies at those existing units. But it's a really, really important baseload for us right now in terms of meeting climate goals, because we know any of those that close today, most of that's going to be picked up by gas, by fossil fuel. So yeah, maintenance of that is critical. There's one more.
Hello, my name is Sarah Jane Galvin. So you touched on the fact that some of the environmental things that we have to do are legislative, like the plastic bag thing, and you said that we need to interact with our legislative local governments to enact these things. But my question is, how is the Department of Environmental Protection specifically discussing with legislative, local, and state governments to enact these things?
So a couple of things. One, a couple of things there. One, regular interaction with the legislature for sure on any number of topics across the board, climate, permits, etc. So they're constantly hearing from us. I will say, and I've heard this directly from some of our legislators, where they'll say, nobody's calling me about that. Like, they're not hearing from their constituents. And it is really, really, if you have a perspective on this, on anything, making your public officials aware of that is important, and it is something that I can attest to the fact that they definitely pay attention to. On the local government side, There's a lot that we do that I didn't get a chance to touch on. We actually, on the water side, and I mentioned this earlier in conversation with Brooke, we delegate certain of our water responsibilities down to the county conservation districts as one example. So we work with those guys all of the time on permit issues, on water quality issues, on those types of things. We've also established, we get a little bit of money from the feds for state energy program. So we're using those dollars to develop climate action plans at the local level. We've partnered with some universities as well as some municipalities. I think we're in our third round of that, and I think we've done a few hundred municipalities now, helping them develop greenhouse gas inventories, helping them develop action plans for their communities, so that we can, we say, like, a lot of times we think of things as top down or bottom up. I would say, like, the best one is meet in the middle, right? So we're working at stuff at the federal level, but we're also working at that local level with communities to help them along as they're looking at how they best address this stuff and bring them resources to do that. Yeah, and we're connecting that back to grant. Once they have the plan, we're connecting that back to grant programs, so we try to help them with implementation too.
Well, thank you so much. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us today. And thank you for all that you're doing for our communities here in Pennsylvania. To all of our friends at home, we thank you for joining us via Zoom and Facebook Live. If you missed today's presentation or would like to go back and watch it again, you can visit our DeSales University YouTube page where we will have it. Again, we are excited about our homecoming and family weekend this week, and we hope you will join us for more events. Have a great night.